This is Across the West here on Grey Cup Game Plan. I'm sitting here with Bob Irving for segment 2 here on our show. Now we want to talk about CFL salaries, Bob.
Okay.
Just for some perspective, Matt Ryan, the quarterback for the Atlanta Falcons, went home with $42 million last season.
Yeah.
That is enough to cover every CFL player's salary.
Pretty well.
Approximate numbers here, but it's said that the average annual salary for a CFL player is about $80,000. Mm-hmm. Rookies making about $50,000.
Yep.
I know we're comparing apples and oranges here between the NFL and the CFL, but it's interesting to compare nonetheless. Yep. But CFL players really are playing for more than just the love of the game sometimes.
Well, that's right. And, it's sheer economics, the difference in the salary scale. It's TV money primarily down in the States where they get huge dollars from network television. Their stadiums are twice as big as our stadiums. They have 10 times as many people as we do. So I just think it's sheer economics. The Canadian Football League salaries have improved a lot in recent years. And the new CBA brought the minimum up from somewhere in the 30s to 50. The average salary's gone up probably in the last 5 years by $15,000 or $20,000 a year, which is great. Yeah. I think the players in the Canadian Football League deserve every nickel they can get. None of them are going to get rich. Although the quarterbacks, Ricky Ray's making over $400,000, Calvillo made over $400,000 when he played. The quarterbacks have a chance to set themselves up pretty well. Right. And some of the top players now are in the $200,000 range. Some of the old linemen make over $200,000. Right. So there's good money to be made, and if you can augment it with some off-field activities and you can play long enough, a CFL salary can stand you in good stead down the road.
Let's continue the conversation, Bob, by going back out to Calgary. Here's Alana Nolan.
Thanks, guys. Here again at McMahon Stadium with the voice of the Calgary Stampeders, Mark Stephen. And Mark, CFL salaries have grown over the years. Several players do have second jobs, but we're seeing kind of a trend where they're getting second jobs for life after football.
Well, that's just it. The CFL players are far more modestly compensated than players in other leagues, so you're inevitably going to need a second career. That includes even the quarterbacks, the veteran established quarterbacks. Someday they'll need a second career, maybe not as quickly as some of the other players, but that's just the reality they have to deal with. They do have 6 months in the off season to work on a career, work on their degree and that. So, it's important that they think about that. The moment they sign a pro contract, they're one day closer to losing their job and being out on the streets. And it happens to a lot of them. And in some cases, it happens faster than they anticipated. So having a second career either in your back pocket or preparing for a second career is vital for a CFL player.
CFL salaries on the rise, but still nowhere near those NFL salaries. Guys, back to you in the studio.
Thank you very much to Alana and Mark in Calgary. So, Bob, 6 months of the offseason that Mark mentioned there, are players getting these second jobs as much as they used to?
No, not at all. I've heard stories from the 50s and 60s where players would work while they played. And the time they put in to train and practice wasn't nearly as long as it is now, and so they would actually work during the season, some of them, and certainly in the off season they'd all have a job. There are still lots that do, but there's less of it. You find now that athletes train year-round like never before, and it's the same in the Canadian Football League. I would say this for players in the CFL versus NFL. In terms of conditioning, there's no difference, really. As a matter of fact, to play in the CFL, you have to have better, I think, aerobic conditioning because you run so much and the field is so wide. Right. So the guys have to train pretty well year-round. I still think it's smart if they do have something in the off season that can generate some income for them to augment the salaries they make. I mean, if you make $70,000 or $80,000 a year as an American up here and you go home and can knock off another 25 or 30 doing something in the off season, you can put some money away, and the money you make playing football, again, can stand you in good stead in the future. But in terms of them working at the same time as they're playing, and a lot of them don't even work in the off season. They just they train all off season.
For those that do, though, I do think it's important, and I agree with you that if you can set up a foundation now with a career that would kind of take over your life after football, that's going to make that transition much smoother, right?
Oh, for
because
sure.
How many times have we seen it in any sport where a player will retire, not really have a plan in place, and all of these issues come into their life, right?
Well, and it rarely ends the way the players want it to.
Yes,
it's very rare that a player chooses when his career ends because virtually all of them get told it's over by a coach or manager before they're ready to have it be over. So, the smart ones are planning well in advance. I think there's fewer and fewer of them who think, well, I'll play for another 5 years when they're 21 or 29 or 30 years old. Yeah. Chances are you're not going to play for another 5 years, and I think that those that say that are fooling themselves, but there's fewer and fewer of those all the time.
Bob, I can't thank you enough for coming in.
My pleasure, Mike.
This has been Across the West here on Grey Cup Game Plan. You're watching Shaw TV.
Andy Deal from the WHL and Crown Canada West Football on Shaw. My favorite Grey Cup memory being from Saskatchewan, the 1989 championship for the Riders. Their first in my lifetime. I was 10 years old when I was watching. It was such a magical run for them. The province was in a frenzy after they beat Calgary, and then 16-2 Edmonton to get to the Grey Cup, and then just a wild game against Hamilton. Tony Champion's great catch to tie it late, and then Dave Ridgway, robo-kicker as we knew him in Saskatchewan, kicking the game-winning field goal as well. First Grey Cup in 23 years for the Riders, so that's a special one for sure. The 89 Grey Cup, my favorite all time.